Good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 4. Basically, I'm gonna be a little bit brief this morning because what I want you guys to do this week is to complete all tasks that have that are needed to be completed since the beginning of semester 2, your virtual locker assignment, your my grandmother meetings, and your identity paragraph assignment. But at the same time, you've got a couple of reading this week, and I'm going to be going over that with you. So again, here we are, week 4. Before we look at the overview, I'm just going to go over the lesson investigating, Indigenous stereotypes and media bias. Okay, then there will be another assignment which I will not post till next week Monday, so that will give each and every one of you an opportunity to complete all tasks that are yet to be completed. And due to the fact that next week we will the week after the next is March break, you guys will have enough time to be able to complete your PSC assignment, and by the time you guys come back from March break, your grades should be coming in, or should be posted by then. So what I want you guys to do this week is to go over this investigating indigenous stereotypes and media bias. Okay, so I wanted to examine the sources of stereotypes and how the media plays a role in creating and perpetuating stereotypes about indigenous peoples. Right? So which ultimately have a profound impact on indigenous peoples and how they express their identities. You will contrast what you learn about stereotypes with realities of indigenous peoples as conveyed through the indigenous heritage, and apply your learning to your novel. Right, when we start our novel Haunting by Stars, which will be in our unit 3. Before we dive into stereotypes that impacts stereotypes and how it impacts indigenous peoples, I want you to think first about what assumptions have been made about you. Right, so here you're going to be some of these based on your personal experiences in a notebook or in a Google Doc. How might people who don't know you describe you? How might you be represented in the media? So you will review your list. How many of these assumptions are positive? How many are negative? What overall messages do these assumptions make about you? How do these assumptions make you feel? Alright, so I want you to save your list. You'll be returning to it shortly. It is something you will need to hand in, but it's something you will use for your own personal reflection as well. So like I said, anything that I give you guys, you want to make sure that you create a Google Doc, and please add all the files you've curated. Make sure that you have a list and keep on adding the files. You might share that with me. I have a student who came in for office hours, and she asked a very brilliant question. Miss O, why do I have to keep all this mini questions in our content? And I said yes, and the reason why you guys have to do this is because you might still come back to need all these questions, to need all these answers that you guys have provided for those questions. For an example, if you guys share all those Google Docs with me, like I said again, let's say you guys I could see how much you have invested in your weekly content readings. This tells me that you are so much involved in this course, because it's an e-learning course. I can't get to see you guys every day, but at the same time, you guys need to be going to your content and making sure you're reading it words for word. So this is how I know, and this is how I'm going to be able to assess you guys that you are actually reading the content and getting everything done. Okay, so basically it's actually a lot reading, and that is why I've decided that I'm not gonna post the PSA summative assignment this week. I'm gonna wait till next week. So we're gonna look at the types of stereotypes, and there are TED talk that you guys will want to watch. And there are reflection tags. Reflect on the following questions. Return once more to that list of assumptions from the start of this lesson. Looking at your list critically, how has history played a role in developing the assumptions made about you? After looking at how assumptions play a role in your life, consider how you define others around you. So, and I myself, as a lived experience, um, African Canadian lady, I know the assumptions when people see me that they have about me. I know how this has actually affected my lived experience. So, yeah, so, and how am I able to navigate through this? Do I allow this to affect me? Does this define me? So those are the questions I kept on asking myself all over and all over again. So after we have looked at the assumptions play a role, how it has played a role in our life, do we consider how you define others around you? So the mere fact that I have a lived experience doesn't mean I have to define others around me to have the same lived experience that I have, right? So these are so this is how at times how to what extent are the assumptions that I make about others impacted by the stereotypes presented in media such as television, podcasts, news, social media, or movies, right? So this so when we consider taking a photograph of, for example, taking a photograph of yourself that challenges the assumptions that have been made about you, then we want to look at it and we want to add it to your page, your notebook, or your Google Doc that you started previously with some comment about how this image challenges assumptions. Alternatively, you can. Alright, so you want to draw a representation or create an avatar to represent yourself. Have a friend or family member take a photo of you and describe what they see. How does their perception of you resonate with your self-perception? The key is to reflect on how the image challenges the assumption that have been made. This is not something you need to submit. It is meant to expand your learning. So action, defining stereotypes and realities. You have already learned about some of the elements that make up Indigenous identities and the different ways in which Indigenous peoples identify themselves. It is also important to know that in addition to these factors, the depictions of Indigenous peoples in the media can also influence how people view and understand First Nations, Métis, and Inuit identities. So what is stereotype? So here are terms and definitions. A stereotype is a well-known but unfair and oversimplified idea or image of a person, social group or thing. It is usually based on word of mouth or on representations in the media and result from the erroneous assumptions that individuals who share one particular characteristic are generally similar, are generally the same, right? So stereotypes do not simply appear overnight, rather they develop over time, and the more they are used, the longer they stick. Okay? So using stereotypes require not considering any factual evidence that could contradict the assumptions being made. The more a stereotype is perpetuated, the better its chance of eventually being held as the truth. So it is so important to remember that stereotypes do not apply to people. They can also be used to oversimplify and inaccurately characterize other things. And an example of this will be when, say, all northern areas of Canada are desolate or overpopulated, when in reality there are both urban and rural areas in North, and both can have thriving communities, prosperous economic economies, and vibrant arts and entertainment scenes. So you want to look at the difference between stereotypes, racism, and prejudice, right? So press on the tab to examine the terms more closely. When you press on this tab, you'll be able to identify the difference between prejudice, stereotypes, and racism. Okay, and check and reflect now that you are familiar with the definition of stereotype, prejudice, and racism, and now how to differentiate them. Draw from your own experience to find an example for each of them. This may include something you have personally witnessed or something you have seen or learned about in the media. So we're going to look at indigenous stereotypes, which is quite prevalent. It's quite prevalent. So you're going to watch the video and think about this. How do you think the stereotypes mentioned in the video could affect how indigenous peoples are perceived by non-indigenous people and how they perceive their own identities? What questions could you ask yourself before you say or do something that could perpetuate a stereotype? This video will have helped you connect the terms you've learned and how they are actually happening in communities. It is important to see that these terms aren't just abstract words found in the dictionary, but that they are part of people's everyday life. Okay, so next we're going to examine how indigenous realities are very different from what the stereotypes make them out to be. So perception, reality, and stereotypes. Okay, so for example, we want you to look at these two pictures, two images of the same person. On the photo on the left, you could read the following government mush. Look again. The caption on the photo on the right reads Kim Wheeler, an Ojibwe Mohawk, a mother, a writer, a publicist, producer, a homeowner, a golfer who paid for her own education. How effective do you think this series is in creating a message for an audience? Where will you place this in your community to have people stop, look, and learn about what people looks like instead of judging them, right? So this is how representation in media could be, and beside word of mouth, the media plays a role in how stereotypes are perpetuated in society. Okay, so the media is another word for various means of mass communication and how messages are spread, especially through television, newspapers, internet, radio. With these modes of communication, certain messages are able to reach millions and sometimes billions of people. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and read that. Then we discover the power of the media to influence our perceptions. I want you to try the following experiment. Imagine that you have just won a trip to anywhere in the world. It might be somewhere you have never been but have always wished to visit. Now, answer the following questions. Where will you go and why? Picture the place in your mind. What do you see? What experience do you imagine you might have there? If you've never been, how do you know what that place is like? Did you learn about the place from one of the sources? A photo or illustration, read about it in a book or other print source, online research, word of mouth from friends or family, online research, in the lyrics of a song or a soundscape, capture there, or which other means. Right, so we're gonna go over all this. So this must be read. You guys must go ahead and make sure that you read all this. I don't want to go. If I should go ahead reading, honestly, you guys will get bored. So I just want you to make sure that you go over discrimination. I want you guys to, once you guys are done, then we're gonna look at the consolidation. And here, with debunking stereotypes, and there's a poem that you guys must listen to. Then I want you guys to ask yourself the question after you guys have watched the video and tell me, how is the king's poem an act of resistance? How does king poems resilience? How does King's poem resilience? I want you to look at that. And speaking out, stereotypes continue to persist, even though indigenous peoples have long been vocal about who they really are and the diversities that exist within their cultures and identities, the actions they are taking to try in order to right these wrongs on their parts. So that is why when you talk about resiliency, we can see that indigenous people over the course of years back have built that resiliency, right? And still, the stereotypes is not going anywhere, right? So we want to look at how resilience is the ability to, or the capacity to rebound, to be successful, to be strong and healthy after experiencing difficulties. Right? So as we walk further into the course, you will examine how indigenous authors are using their voices for resistance and resilience to speak out against stereotypes and the beliefs they endanger, as well as the discriminatory behavior that often results from these beliefs. You will also learn how you can work towards becoming an advocate, an ally, able to uplift and amplify indigenous voices. Right? So we need to speak up, looking at the indigenous peoples over the years, their resiliency, despite the harsh, the difficult experience that they've gone through from one generation to the other, they are still able to maintain and to build that um, ability or capacity to rebound and to be successful all over and all over again. And we're gonna give this I'm giving the lesson a credit to TVO Learn NBE course for this lesson. So this is how I want you guys to make sure that you go about this investigating stereotype and bias um, about indigenous people. So and again, I've also provided your week 4 overview, and this further explains stereotypes and bias, and this will cover next week. This will be a continuation next week as well, whereby we're gonna learn more about stereotype and biases. So again, I've provided a slide deck for you, which is week 4, February the 24th to 28th. And when you guys go over this, so investigating indigenous stereotypes and bias, that's what we're going to be looking at this week. And just like I've explained in on the content investigating stereotypes and biases, I've kind of chunked it down here to make it a little bit more accessible and more readable with videos for you. Right? You're going to look at colonization. You want to familiarize yourself with colonization and how it has impacted indigenous peoples. Then there are quite videos here for you guys to watch. We're going to look at what is bias, prejudice, just like I just went over that with you on the weekly the lesson on detailed bright-space content. Okay, so yeah, so this is what we're gonna be doing over this week, and I want you guys to make sure that you read and let me see what I have here. Analyzing in the news discussion area. Let me see if I've provided anything for you guys here. Okay. So these are some articles that you guys want to go over to look at. Go back. This is still your Tuesday reading. After viewing, let's discuss. So there will be a discussion. I'm gonna provide that for you. We can talk about, after you guys have read um, the books by Ngozi, how um, how do you feel? Like the books Ngozi grew up reading, most history books were also written by the British. How do you think this will impact the way we understand history? So, this is a book you want to watch. Chimamanda Ngozi. It's a TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and consider the impact when we read from only one point of view. So, reading from that just one point of view, after you've viewed it, then we'll discuss on that, and that means that will be on your discussion board. You open a thread after reading it, and we'll discuss. So, just going over that, we want to look at protagonist and antagonist, right? So we know that it is only in Canada that Canada has begun to confront its history of colonialism and to address its legacy and consider other perspectives outside of its own. So there are two predominant types of characters in most: the protagonist um, and the antagonist. So I want you guys to go over, make sure that you read it, and there's a little video here that you guys want to watch. Want to look at the third person, the objective, limited, omniscient, and we want to look at point of view. Then we want to look at perspective, point of view, and colonization. As you work your way through this course, think about how point of view applies to what you are reading. When you as a reader ask whose point of view is being represented in a story, you are better able to understand whose point of view might be missing. You are now thinking, you want to think critically about what you are reading. Whose voices is missing from a narrative is a very powerful question to ask. So that means so the writer is trying to imply, just for one to look at it from just one point of view. What about other perspective? Which one am I really even? What's the narrative about? It is what they are feeding me on. So right, so whose voice is actually missing? So when you put the puzzle together, then one will be able to think and answer the question. So on again, we're going to continue this on Wednesday. We'll look at the historical and contemporary impact of colonization on indigenous people. And when we talk about assimilation, that's a large goal of colonization is a large goal or a goal of colonization is assimilation. So in other words, to understand the aims of assimilation, let's read the following excerpt from God's Guild graphic novel 500 Years of Resistance. So you guys will go ahead and read this, and once you guys have done reading, we work together to answer the questions that follow to synthesize your understanding of the meaning and purpose of assimilation, and to identify how education was used as a tool to promote and achieve assimilation and how it connects to the characters and community in your novel. Note that this text uses the word native to refer to indigenous people. And bear in mind, just keep this, because I know when you guys keep on seeing that novel, that's the novel we're going to be reading in the class, and that will be introduced by the end of our unit 2. So unit 2 will start definitely when we return back from March break, and we're going to be talking about oral storytelling. Okay, so just bear in mind. And so we want to look at the reflection questions. What is the meaning of assimilation according to 400 years of resistance? How is education used in assimilation according to 500 years of resistance? Okay, so we want to reflect on this. So we'll move on to residential schools, and I know that you might have heard or listened read about residential schools. And so the creation of residential schools was another colonial act that had a tremendous impact on indigenous peoples. This experience is linked to the loss of ancestral connections, lands, traditions, teachings, and cultural and historical knowledge systems. So prior to the actual creation of residential schools, the India Act sets the stage for indigenous schooling in Canada by mandating the education of First Nations peoples. Inuit and Métis peoples were not included in the Indian Act, but were enrolled in schools nonetheless. The Inuit were forced to attend residential schools much later than First Nations and Métis peoples due to limited access to the Arctic regions in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So we're going to be talking about that in more details. Residential schools. These are a picture. Students and teachers from St. Paul's Indian Industrial School, a residential school in Middle Church, Manitoba, in 1901. Residential schools study notes. It is important to know that not every Inuk, First Nations, or Métis individual attended a residential school. Enrollment was based on the community in which they lived, the agent in charge of students attending when the schools in their area opened, as well as additional reasons specific to each situation. Okay. So again, we're going to look at residential schools in depth. We know that approximately 139 recognized residential schools in operation across Canada, which operated from the mid 1880s to 1996. And one of the core purposes of the schools was to eliminate indigenous culture and traditions and eventually make the indigenous population indistinguishable from others in mainstream society, to assimilate them into the dominant culture, thereby ensuring that there will no longer be a distinct indigenous population in Canada. And this process is called assimilation, where indigenous people will abandon their indigenous identities and absorb European or Western identity that, in the view of the government and the church, was considered civilized and superior. Like, give me a break. Right? So the resiliency that indigenous people have built over the years is commendable. While this process of assimilation took many forms, there are a few common ways of assimilation that took place through the residential schools. Children were removed from their homes, their communities. They were taken away from their parents, and they are forced to attend schools that were sometimes 100 kilometers away from where they live. Imagine somebody taking you from your parents while you guys were going young and take you to where you do not even want to be in the first place. And in most cases, most of the students did not even return back home. Isn't that cruelty? Isn't that wickedness? So it became illegal for indigenous parents to keep their children at home, even if they were of schooling age. Like, some children were taken at even earlier ages, and some did not even return to their communities until the age of 18, if at all. If at all they do return. So as a result, many lost connections to their homes, to their lands, to their communities, and did not grow up learning from their parents, their grandparents, or community elders. It was thought that children were easier to indoctrinate than adults. So when you indoctrinate someone, right, you're trying to force them with things that they do not want to be forced on, and that they will later pass on this what you have taught them from one generation to another with this newly acquired culture for their own future generations. Thereby, you're scraping up, completely eradicating the indigenous culture in them, thinking that if you indoctrinate them, they're going to pass it on from their own generation from another. So I have a video of a residential schools in Canada, a timeline. You guys need to watch the perspective on the residential school system. And we're going to read the story expert again, featuring the perspective of Mary John Sr. The story by Bridget Moran begins when Mary John is told at the age of 7 that she must attend a residential school. Expert from Stony Creek Women, the story of Mary John. Tell me, how do you guys feel after reading that? Then we're going to look at the lasting impact of Indigenous peoples, how it has affected them. So we know that perspective aside, the schools and their policies against Indigenous students, families, and communities undoubtedly affect First Nations, Inuit, Métis people in Canada at the time and still do even as of today. Even if they did not attend schools themselves, the intent of the schools and the effect on Indigenous identities continue long after the schools were closed. Residential schools also existed across Canada for a long period of time and have affected Indigenous peoples differently across the country. Some students were assimilated into mainstream Canadian culture after attending the schools, where they become English speakers and could no longer speak their traditional language or fit into their Indigenous communities. Still others were able to reclaim their traditions and relearn what the schools aim to take away from them. Whichever path Indigenous people have taken in the past or continue to take is their own and should be respected as such. Like I said, I'm an African Canadian and I come from Nigeria, and in my country we have so many languages that we speak, and I'm proud that I can speak my language fluently and I've passed that onto my children, and I want to keep that. I want to be that elder keeper whereby we can pass our language, our culture from one generation to the other. So it's so important that we know how resiliency has impacted the Indigenous people over the years. And again, these are all videos of residential schools, the victim versus survivors, and the 90s, the 60s scoop. I'm going to start from here next week, as this will be a continuation of our readings next week. I know I've taken almost 32 minutes of your time. It could be very boring when you guys are going over this, but I'm just passionate. And at times when I look at my resiliency over the years, when I got into Canada and people look at me, judge me because of my skin, because of my culture, the way I speak, I can always relate to how over the years Indigenous people have felt. Imagine we coming to Canada, which is even not our land. The land belongs to Indigenous people, and they are being forced to the reserve, they are being forced to schools they do not want to go to. It's really a trauma, and that trauma cannot be taken away. Yeah, so I'm just going to stop here in this light. Again, guys, please go over all your task completed. We do not really have much this week than reading, and again I will form a discussion board on the Chimana Ngozi Chimana's novel, and we guys can go there and do and join the discussion board. That's basically for this week. You guys have a lovely week, and I'm hoping to have our office hours on Thursday. I'm gonna be away on Tuesday, so our office hours will be on Thursday. You have a great one. Again, if you guys have any question, any clarification, please guys do not hesitate to send me an email. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.